Thank you for returning for the Daily Bread Bible study. This is day 151. This is for May 30th, 2020, focusing on Job 17 through 20. We find Job in that familiar hard place. In verse 1 of chapter 17, he says, "My spirit is broken." Job again states his feeling of being of what he experiences being around his friends. "Surely there are mockers around me, and my eye dwells on their provocation." He chastises his friends, saying in verse 5, "Those who denounce friends for reward, the eyes of their children will fail." And he feels like in verse 6, "I am one before whom people spit." He feels like his friends are spitting at him. They're disdaining him. They're saying they're repulsed by him. And that's not a fun place to be. Job then uses a metaphor concerning darkness, basically saying, if I accept that I'm stuck in this present suffering, darkness, Sheol, or pit, if I don't fight against it, if I don't do anything, then where is my hope? So Job 18 goes back to Bildad, the second of the line of friends. And Bildad again speaks, taking offense at Job's metaphor for his friends. Bildad asks of the friends group, "Why are we stupid in your sight?" He then speaks of how fruitless Job's actions are. He says, "You will tear yourself in your anger," basically saying that being angry is only going to destroy Job. In verse 5 of chapter 18, "Surely the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of their fire does not shine." Bildad uses imagery of the wicked wandering blindly, being ensnared by their own blindness and wicked plots. See, Bildad thinks Job is setting himself up for failure. He uses imagery here in Job 18:16. "Their roots dry up beneath, and their branches wither above. Their memory perishes from the earth, and they have no name in the street. They are thrust from light into darkness and driven out of the world." Bildad continues in Job 18:21, saying that knowing God's ways and following them will lead to prospering. In verse 21, "Surely such are the dwellings of the ungodly. Such is the place of those who do not know God." In Job 19, we get that response of where Job's hope is at. So Job listens and again wants to comforting words and not judgment. He starts off in verse 2 of chapter 19, "How long will you torment me and break me into pieces with words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me. Are you not ashamed to wrong me? And even if it is true that I've erred, my error remains with me. If indeed you magnify yourselves against me and make my humiliation an argument against me, know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net around me." Job claims that God is not responding to the violence enacted upon Job. In verse 7 it says, "Even when I cry out violence, I am not answered. I call aloud, but there is no justice." He uses the following metaphors to describe his feeling of God's actions. He feels God has walled up my way, in verse 8. "Set darkness upon my path, stripped my glory from me." Verse 10 breaks me down. "Uprooted my hope like a tree," and in verse 11 counts me as his adversary. See, Job feels estranged from God. Not only God too, but his family and his friends he feels estranged from. In verse 14, "My relatives and my close friends have failed me. The guests in my house have forgotten me. My serving girls count me as a stranger, and I have become an alien in their eyes. Could you imagine being kicked out of your home and unloved? Maybe you've experienced that, and if so, I'm sorry, that is a hard place to be. Job 19:17 says, my breath is repulsive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. And then in verse 19, all my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I loved have turned against me. Job feels alone. Now, this is incredibly hard for him, and it's also incredibly hard for me as well. I just want to go and give Job a big hug and let him know that he is not alone in his suffering. But yet, in all of this sadness, Job still trusts God. In Job 19:25, it says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. This sermon, this text is often used around funerals. We have part of our liturgy, which there at the committal service often repeats these words from Job 19. And this is very fitting for people who've suffered greatly, people who feel alone and deserted by God. And it's the hope, that we cling to, is that God will show up when we need him. And especially we state this around funerals because my theology kind of speaks of God's presence even in the midst of suffering, and that death is not the final word that we have in our lives, that the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the life that we get to live with God even after death is one in which we get to celebrate and cherish. And so these words here are words that often relate to we thinking of our Redeemer as Jesus. I don't think Job's quite saying it that way. He's thinking more directly of God and getting to see God and have an accounting, and then get to see God speak to him and speak of how Job has had to endure all of these things, and he knows that God will redeem him. So finally, in Job 20, it's Zophar's turn again, the third of the friends. And Zophar says that he is feeling moved in the spirit and compelled to respond. In verse 2 of chapter 20, pay attention, my thoughts urge me to answer because of the agitation within me. I hear censor that insults me, and a spirit beyond my understanding answers me. So Zophar is essentially saying, in his opinion, that God is telling him to speak these words. He then sounds a lot like Bildad, though, saying, let me explain about the folly of the wicked, and goes into a diatribe on that. In verse 6 of chapter 20, he says, their head reaches to the clouds, yet they will perish forever like their own dung. So he thinks the wicked, feel self-righteous and lifted up, but they will also perish and be nothing. He says, wickedness is a venom that may taste sweet at first, yet will poison the wicked and eventually make them sick. And of the wicked, they will take things in greed, and then the earth will rise up against them. So summarizing in Job 20:29, this is the portion of the wicked from God, the heritage decreed for them by God. Thus now we have finished and come to the conclusion of this Daily Bread Bible study. We have finished the words of Zophar, and in fact, this is the last time in the book of Job we will hear words from him. The next time we will see Zophar mentioned, it is in fact Job who will be speaking on his behalf and praying to God for God's forgiveness of Zophar and the words that he spoke against Job. Now, a lot is going to happen between now and then, and I look forward to discussing more of that at another time.